Welcome to Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, break down the process, and meet others who've done it so you can leap into your own story. We interview amazing guests who provide powerful insights that inspire you to get your story told. Be sure to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com, and while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media network. Now sit back, get ready to take some notes, and let's get started. This episode of Leap Into Your Story podcast is brought to you by Leap Into Your Story course. Visit leapintoyourstory.com, where you have a guide to get your story told.
I'm Victoria Anderson. Welcome to the Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, work through the process, and meet others who've done it already. We interview amazing guests who provide powerful insights that will inspire you to leap into your own story. So be sure to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com. And while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media network. In this episode, we're going to learn about summoning inspiring shadows. My guest today is Dave Reek. He's a dark epic fantasy author and a story grid certified editor. So Dave, thank you for joining us today. Now,
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you talk about epic dark fantasy. But first, before we dive into questions and discussions, tell us a little bit about your writing journey, because according to your bio, you didn't really start out as a writer in your early career path. So take us along how you ended up writing.
Unless you count software as fiction, then I've been doing that for longer than just about anything else. Writing novels became something I was really committed to doing in about 2011. So it's been a decade of me trying to figure out how to assemble a story. I have a lot of trunk novels, and I'm still mad. Many people, my first editor, Phil Athens and Chuck Wendig, have all told me, you're going to have to write 1 million words of, do you have a bleep? I guess I won't use that word, crap. In order to figure out how to write a good story. And I was like, no, I can do it faster than that. I'm better than that. And I'm not. So it took a whole bunch of books, lots and lots of words under the bridge. I found Story Grid, which helped me as a nerd understand the engineering principles and at least begin crafting better. So this year, my debut goes out in October. I found my voice and my brand, and it's just taken a long time, because I still have that onerous day job, which pays the bills and establishes the lifestyle, and the empty condo that I'm sitting in right now because we just moved to Seattle. But it's been a sojourn, but I've enjoyed the process. Sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes you got to figure it out. Critique groups have been really, really helpful to me, because writing can be lonely. It can be a solo thing sometimes. But having people to work with, having writing coaches to encourage you and point you in the right direction, and having great editors. The editor I'm working with for this particular quadrilogy is fantastic. Shayla is really supportive, encouraging, and apparently she needs to be there because I don't know what a comma is for. I either have too many of them or not enough of them. I thought I knew. I'm a native speaker of English. I got an almost perfect score on the verbal section of the SAT, but apparently Chicago Manual of Style and I disagree about where commas go. So here I am, launching my first book. Kickstarter's next month, and the book follows in October. So we'll have hardcovers, we'll have paperbacks and ebooks. But for me, it's learning. This is an investment in a future career. Eventually, I'm going to get tired of wrangling nerds and writing software, and I'll want to settle in. So maybe write full-time is an option. Most authors don't. Historically, since the printing press was invented, most authors have another job. There's the rare 0.01% who are so supremely successful on purpose or by accident that they can live without that other income. But I think maybe once the condo's paid for, I'll lean on my wife, who's a teacher. We'll just live on hers, and she can be my sugar mama, and I can just write and stare out across Elliott Bay and watch the Eagles, and someday finish another book.
Nice. Very nice. Well, let's go ahead and dive into some questions. So
Okay.
let's start out with what does dark epic fantasy mean? So tell us a little bit about that genre.
It's a squishy definition. Dark fantasy originally, years ago, meant horror in a fantasy setting of some kind. I think it's taken on other connotations, like the evolution of anti-hero has come to mean something different than it used to mean. So for me, dark epic fantasy is nation level stakes or cosmic power levels, things that rock the world. But dark means that we don't shy away from the gritty reality, the gore, the horror, the parts of war and danger and politics that Tolkien and a lot of epic fantasy shy away from. So historically, since Herodotus and Homer and the Iliad, war has been glorified. It's always the charge of the Light Brigade. It is this glorious thing, and we don't get the reality of it. And I think that dark is more willing to show us the shadow agency in all of us. Humans are not creatures of light and joy and responsibility and justice. That's only half of us. The other half of us are the shadow agency. It's the monster inside all of us, as Plato would describe it, that gives us the power to survive, to thrive, to take care of our own, and to take what we want from the world. And in reality, it's a balance. I think that a lot of poetry and a lot of epic fantasy that gives it a fluffy context. I think that Sanderson does a good job at balancing. Mistborn is a great story, and he gets into some of the darkness, but there's a whole bunch of shadows that he avoids and doesn't talk about, that doesn't happen on the page. He alludes to it. Whereas Martin and Abercrombie and Rice and Lawrence go there. They take you into not just the room where it happens, but inside the body it's happening to. And I think that there are a lot of readers who want to vicariously experience that sort of horror and terror and adventure without actually experiencing it, because the reality of it is somewhat shocking. But we see it on the news now. We live in a world that's not PG rated anymore. The news is as R rated as just about anything you can get from Netflix or Cinemax or whoever's making content these days. And that's where, for me, dark epic fantasy lives. It's people who sometimes do bad things for good reasons. An anti-hero may not be someone you aspire to be, but it's certainly somebody you want in your corner if you need a rescue.
That's a very interesting insight. Somebody you don't necessarily want to be, but you want in your corner if you need him.
Yeah, everybody needs a friend like Saul.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs a friend like White. Everybody needs somebody you can call when it goes wrong. One of my favorite series that seems to be wrapping up is The Blacklist. Raymond Reddington is the kind of guy you want to know, but you may not want to hang out with. You may not want to go into business with, but you have a card. And when something goes wrong, that's the call you make. You drop a dime and say, I need a favor.
Right. Or who will do something that you would like to do, but you don't want to do it yourself.
Yeah, because you don't want to get caught, or
That's right.
you don't want to dismember a body. You don't
Right.
want to go get a sulfuric acid and dissolve it.
Yes.
Let somebody else take care of that. You
Yeah.
have cleaners for that. But
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, I think that more people have those impulses, and dark fantasy allows us to experience them and to work through them. So through those of us who write it, like Stephen King writes horror, he's written a lot of very dark fantasy, and he has said on the record he does it so he doesn't go insane, because he has those impulses. And I, like Stephen, I believe everyone does. There are a lot of people who tell you that they never get angry, they never have fights with anybody, they've never wanted to murder someone and dispose of the body. If they're over the age of 7, I think they're lying.
Possibly.
Or they live in a Pollyanna world that I've never experienced.
Well,
as a former cop, I can tell you that there's a point at which anybody will snap.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's interesting that you bring up the kind of Pollyanna, because I just read an article recently about toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And this, I think, dark fantasy is actually on the other spectrum, which brings me into my next question, which is, do you think, do you know what the popularity or the need for dark fantasy? I mean, I think toxic positivity may create that need, but let's talk about.
So a lot of people ask, why would you?
And the desire of that genre. I mean, has that gained popularity recently? Has it stayed popular?
I think so, but I haven't done the market research. My friend Alex Newman at K-Lytics could tell you whether it's trending up or down. Okay. But I have high positivity personalities that don't like dark fantasy that ask, well, why do you write that? After the pandemic, aren't we done with that? Isn't the world already horrible enough and we need light and hope and joy? I don't think so. Yeah. Game of Thrones gained a lot of popularity once HBO put it on the map. We won't talk about the ending because that's a different story, but in the grand scheme of things, I think that there are people who enjoy that. I just now got around to watching the series on Netflix, the second season of Altered Carbon. It's dark sci-fi. Now, the difference, I think, between sci-fi and fantasy for me is sci-fi's always had an inner core, as a little line of darkness in sci-fi that fantasy hasn't had. And has only slowly developed over time. Tolkien gave us the concept of high fantasy in a way that I don't think we had before. And that's kind of separated the constructed world fantasy from the urban, what we call urban fantasy now, that used to be called low fantasy. The common world, the everyday world, with some elements of magic or realism, magical realism. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that people want more of it because they're looking for a way to navigate what we're experiencing every day. Whether it's revolution, the fall of Kabul, or earthquakes and horrible things in Haiti, the collapse of countries like Venezuela. What if it happens here? Right. Because some of us wonder. Everything that has ever begun, every country, every democracy has eventually ended. Right. How will we navigate that? And some people want to think through, what do I do if that happens? Some people want a little more separation. So urban fantasy, I think, is more visceral and it's real. It's right here. It's in my world. What if I do these things? It's a thriller. For me, the epic part of fantasy, the high fantasy constructed world, separates us a little more than zombies in the streets today. So it's an exploration. For me, the quadrilogy that I'm writing, the first book comes out in October, is The Temple of Vengeance. I've always loved a good revenge story. The Count of Monte Cristo and any retelling of that. I love the series Revenge. It's fantastic. For me, it's about exploring, what do I do? Full disclosure, I'm a Scorpio. Don't cross me. But but as a very much older person now, I've learned how to navigate the world and let that go. And so this is an exploration of an anti-heroine who's trying to set the world right. And her crisis question for 4 books is, can I set it right? Can I fix it without setting the whole world on fire? And sometimes I think you got to light a match, set things on fire.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the balance. I studied Chi, and the great Chi masters will tell you that enlightenment is not about all light. It's about the integration, and not necessarily integration, because I know there's some philosophies that always talk about integration. It's the coexistence and the balance. So you can't have too much. If you have too much light, then you get the Pollyanna, unrealistic, toxic positivity. And if you're too much dark, the darkness that's the dark side of human nature. That will be the sociopath, psychopath, sociopath that just destroys everything in the path. So I think with dark epic fantasy it's one of those counterbalance things that are needed. And
it's finding the place where the shadow is necessary, where you have to let your platonic monster loose. In the triune psyche that Plato talks about, the person, the monster, and the lion are the way that I think Jung talks about the same thing. And what you're describing is the balance of light and shadow. We have to have both, and trying to cut shadow out of our world
it throws
makes us victims of bullies. It makes us victims of tyrants. It makes us victims of the panhandler on the corner, just because we're scared and we don't have enough shadow, enough monster agency to say, back off. No, not today.
Right.
And sometimes you got to protect your own.
Exactly. I know my books, all of them, I have, and it's by the 3rd book. So Touched, Trial by Fire, and Mastering the Paradox really understands that my shadow women, which are these females in my path that are always stopping me from, a victory. And the long story short is I learned more about myself and what I needed to step up to get past that. And in the end, it's a counterbalance. Every single one of them has some sort of like karmic retribution come their way, but it happens organically. I didn't have to do anything, but that only came after I understood a little bit and took what I need from them, which was some of their traits I needed to incorporate it in myself and stop trying to push it away, because I knew deep down that was a necessary thing for me to get to my next level.
And I think that's something that as authors that I learned most clearly from Sean Coyne when I was going through the StoryGrid certification. He talks about why we write, and everybody's writing a book for a reason. Every author's trying to figure something out.
Yes.
Now, sure, there are people who have cookie cutters. They write to market. They follow a basic structure and a template. And for them, it's a piece of work. It's a pot boiler. They're just writing to make money, and that's fine. But any work in which you're creatively engaged, you're trying to figure out a problem for yourself. Mm-hmm. You're trying to psychologically or metaphysically sort something out. Stephen Pressfield talks about that in his Artist Journey book. The book that you're writing, you're on the same journey or a similar parallel journey to the hero that you're writing about. to figure something out along with the hero, because the artist's journey follows the hero's journey.
Right.
So that catharsis is important. And I think that's one of the differences between books that we just flip through, we page through, we read and we enjoy, have a lot of strong narrative drive. They pull us into the next chapter with cliffhangers, but we close it and we're done. We're not any different. What I want to write, my aspiration, my intention is to write books that change people for the better. My philosophy is that better stories make better people, because how we think is in story. Literally, I don't believe we're Homo sapiens anymore. Since the Toba event, we have been Homo narrans, because we cannot even think without story. It's so fundamental to processing things, whether it's what psychologists call rationalization, or if it's figuring it out, forecasting into the future, figuring out what we do next is a story we're telling ourselves. For me, this one is a story that I'm trying to figure out how far is too far, how much vengeance is tolerable, how much is too much. I mean, that's the exploration for, at least for this beginning series.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great insight. I think you're right, because even some other authors that I question about, what's about the characters, your lead characters, but what are you kind of jealous of them too? And one that kind of surprised him, because she was like, no, I'm not jealous. And she's like, wait, she had a mother that I never had, that, my mother was this, and the character's mother was, the mother I always wanted. So sometimes it does come up unconsciously. I think we do that unconsciously.
You can see that in musicians, you can see that in poets, in authors, in movie makers. I honestly think that the screenwriters, whoever's writing the NCIS series, has got some serious daddy issues that they're working through in season 18 or whatever they're up to now, because every story is a relator story and it's all about dad. There are others that are all about mom and mommy issues. We all have them. We all have these scars. If we're all over the age of infancy, we have accumulated some things we need to work through. I honestly, my personal belief is everybody needs a counselor, whether it's a formal therapist relationship or a friend, because every good relationship should be a little therapeutic. You and I talk through something, we're helping each other in some way. And the people who think they don't need a shrink need one worse than the people who are willing to talk to one. But that's where I come from. Yeah. Mental health is something we don't talk about enough. And I explore one of the conceits of the magic system in my book is that our memories are who we are. It's what we are. They are a composition of magic. And so the world, the physical world, is also composed of the same energy. And during the course of the first book, because she doesn't take the time to learn how to use magic correctly, my anti-heroine loses memories. She burns part of herself to accomplish her goals and forgets important things, because we got to be careful. And honestly, one of the scarier things for people who are around me would be Alzheimer's or diseases that cause people dementia. If it happens to me, that's great. I don't care because I won't know. But if it happens to my wife, that's where it's heartbreaking. Right. I have 3 kids with autism, and so I'm very sensitive to neurodiversity and to disability. I have an adult child who's going to live with us in perpetuity because he isn't independent enough to live on his own. I'm hoping to find the magic pill someday that's going to fix that and send him off into the world like his siblings. But I think that we all need to stop and take a look at the people around us, the people we go to work with, and consider their point of view. And that's one of the beauties of stories. It lets us inhabit another person. I think readers are better people simply because they're more accustomed to putting their mind in somebody else's shoes and thinking about something from someone else's perspective. We need to get more people reading. There's too many people who are willing to just watch Netflix and chill. And I don't think that's the same. It's a different medium because it's a spectacle you're watching, you're not participating in. Reading is more personal because you become, for a good, well-written story anyway, you inhabit the skin of the characters that you are experiencing.
Right. And there's studies that prove it's a different part of the brain that's activated. TV or TV screens have a hypnotic kind of effect on the brain versus the reading, which again is interactive, like you had mentioned.
For a good book, though, I don't actually remember reading. Pages go by, and I don't even read dead trees anymore. I read almost exclusively digital. And
Wow.
who knew I read faster because turning pages takes too much time. But I do like the feel and the smell of a good book, paper, hardcover stuff. That's the reason why we're doing the Kickstarter in September for the hardcover, because I want one. I want to put it on my empty shelves that I haven't got anything to move into yet. But
Well, when the digital publishing hit the scene, I remember seeing all the articles, oh, paper's dead. It'll never come back.
our culture is slow. We don't move quickly. And I think that's something that a lot of visionaries, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, forget sometimes, is they're on the bleeding edge or on the way past the bleeding edge of adoption of things. Most people don't. 90% of the population are late movers and late adopters. And culturally, we still use words and terms that are thousands of years old.
Exactly. Well, what's interesting about that, within 2 years, the demand actually did a pendulum swing back to the other spectrum. And my publisher, my first book, which is Touched, they weren't able to pivot because the print on demand software was so expensive. They couldn't, well, they had the software, but they couldn't mesh it with the existing software, and ultimately went belly up. Actually, there was two publishers.
Ouch.
One I signed a contract with, one that was just entertaining. They said, send us more samples, but they were having the identical problem because the pendulum swung so fast and so unexpected that they couldn't pivot to meet the demands and fill the publishing, quota that they needed to stay in business. But I know
2020 did the same thing. 2020 saw an uptick in readership, and we're seeing a downward trend, I think, in 2021 as people are starting to try to get back to something like what we had before in the before times. But I think that pod is going to get better as the printers get cheaper and we can move them onshore. Right now, the distribution channel, the supply chain is so fragile. We've got to get to a place where it's a more anti-fragile and we have local, whether it's Canadian or Mexican or in the US, publishing capacity and manufacturing capacity, just to think about everything, that we are more sustainable and not dependent on other outsourced things. Not to get political, but there were a lot of things I wanted in 2020 that just were in a warehouse in Shanghai or Beijing or in Hong Kong, couldn't get here.
Right.
So I think we'll make that shift. We'll get to a place where we do have more of that, because pod is I think the future. There's no reason to print a warehouse full of books.
Exactly.
If you can in a weekend assemble 15 copies that were ordered last week and ship them, that's probably good enough. But there will always be those printing at scale. There's James Patterson's still going to have 1 million copies of something printed every time he publishes a new book.
Yes.
Because the demand is there. He is on that end of the scale. He's his masterclass was fascinating. It was a very interesting watch for me. And I will continue to study people with that level of success. But for me, writing's a vocation. I'm not doing it to become a millionaire. I'm doing it because I want to put those stories out in the world and share them with people. And I want to change the world. So if I can find 5 or 10 people who are my tribe, I mean, I think I maybe have a dozen people, not counting my mom and my wife, on my newsletter right now. But those are the people I'm writing for. They're the people who care enough to read those pages. And I will gather them over time, and we will continue to inhabit this world together. And are many, many more books to come. I have 3 series planned in my head and some on paper to follow this one. So what I want to do is go from where I've begun at the cosmic power level. And eventually, in the 3rd or 4th series, we're talking about personal stakes. Because for me, those are far more interesting for the person and how they are navigating their ordinary life with things that are at risk that we can all equate with. Because the presidential level of politics or the God level of cosmic power is fascinating. It's interesting to a lot of us, but it's not something that I do on a daily basis. I have 24 employees at my day job, and wrangling nerds at that level is interesting. And it's useful because I get to know them personally. I get to know their families. I get to know what their life is like and help them navigate things the way that I have. Most of them are much younger, but I think stories at that level, the stories like Mark Lawrence writes, Red Sister for me was a fascinating book about a young woman navigating a world from a horrible situation to a much higher power level. And she evolves. Nona makes significant changes. And I really enjoyed her story as she grew up. And I'm looking forward to reading the rest of that. So that's where I want to get to. But I need to build the world. And so I've begun at the cosmic level, at the pantheon level. And the new goddess who is being born through this quadrilogy is the genesis of all of what will follow.
Nice. Now and this is your first book, correct?
This is the first one that I'm going to actually let other people read. It's not my first book, but it's the first one that I actually feel confident enough to put out in the world, pay for a cover, and sell.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll just pretend it's my first book.
Okay. So, well, let's talk about your goal for writing. What are your goals, your hopes, your dreams, and what's your definition of if it's succeeded, how it succeeds, or what you'll consider it being a success?
For me, if one person's life is made better and they make a different choice because they read my book, I win. Full stop. I'm losing money publishing this book. It's costing me more to hire people to help me with marketing and to publish the book and paint really beautiful paintings. My artists are fantastic that I can use for advertising and put out into the world. And that's okay. My goal is to gather some attention and to gather a tribe of people who like the kinds of books that I write. So the success will be, a wild success would be to make back all the money I've invested in the book. That would be amazing. If that happens, cool. Then we're ahead of the game. But in any business, I've started many businesses. I've had lots of startups in my career. I'm an entrepreneurial personality. They all lose money to begin with. And a lot of authors that I talk to, people who are, I want to write a book and then I can pay off my house. That's adorable. That's really very unlikely to happen. It could. I don't want to destroy your dreams and hope, but I also want to set reasonable expectations. My clients, as a StoryGrid certified editor, when I'm helping them, I want to set those reasonable expectations that 99% of the books on Amazon sell fewer than 10 copies a year. They don't even sell one a month. There's 10 million books out there on Kindle, and the vast majority of them have copies bought by friends and family or the author themselves and gifted to other people because please read my book. I get it. I understand. And it's hard. Advertising costs money. Paying attention, getting attention costs money. And so if you go into it with the mindset of, this is something I'm doing as a vocation. So I love the Elizabeth Gilbert formulation, where you have job, career, vocation, and hobby. For a lot of authors, writing's a hobby, and it could turn into something. But if that's all it isn't even their core. For me, it's a vocation. It's something I'll do for free, and I'm actually paying other people to be for the privilege of doing it. So if I actually sell more than 250 copies, yay. If I sell more than 1,000, I'm way ahead of the game. That puts me in the 1% territory. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm giving away ARCs right now. Anybody on my newsletter gets a copy of the book. They can read it. I'm not charging them. All I ask is give me an honest review on Goodreads. Tell me what you think. The reviews aren't even really for me. They're for other readers, because I think that too many people want to write a book that everybody will love. And that you'll write a milquetoast book. You'll write a book that, I love vanilla, but most people apparently don't. Everybody thinks vanilla is just boring. But if you want to write a book that changes people, you have to take a position. It's polarizing. It's something that a lot of people won't like, and that's okay. I'm not looking for those people. I talked to a guy in the elevator who teased me about my shirt. And I said, well, yeah, I'm a novelist. My wife bought me the shirt. And he said, what do you write? So I described the book. He's like, oh, well, good luck with that, because he's not my readership. Because I could just tell in describing this dark, epic fantasy story. He's like, oh, yeah, it's not his jam. I'm not writing it for him. Like Seth Godin says, it's not for you. I'm sorry. And carry on to the next. So if I get some great 1-star reviews, I'm going to use them for advertising. Some of my author friends do that. Willa Blair has one of my favorite 1-star reviews for one of her books. And this reads just like Diana Gabaldon, 1 star. Well, thank you. That's amazing. So if I get a 1-star review like that, I would be happy to turn that into an ad, because that sends a signal to readers who look at the 1-star reviews and go, oh, well, I like Diana Gabaldon. I'd give that 5 stars, so I'll give this book a try. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but I see the meme go around every once in a while about Silence of the Lambs. Not a single lamb, 1 star. Well, okay, somebody came into this with the entirely wrong expectation, and that's a signal. Beverly Jenkins, who's a friend of mine, my acquaintance. I've met her enough. I've been through some of her workshops. She's a fantastic romance writer. I really enjoy her books. She says reviews are not for authors. We shouldn't even read them. They're for other readers. It's readers talking to each other and letting each other know what this book is about, what it's like, and who it's for. And so that's the primary reason I ask for reviews. If I need validation, I go ask my wife how wonderful I am, and she will tell me exactly how wonderful I am. And being old enough now that I don't really need that, that's okay.
Yeah, well, you have to set out with realistic expectations, but I know of at least one author who uses all his bad reviews, and he had some weird one like the lamb silence, and they're hilarious. He sends them out on his email for his newsletter. They are hilarious, and he's actually hoping for goofy ones, because we all wait for that.
I saw one on Twitter, and the author came to Twitter to apologize to the Goodreads reviewer who found his story about vampires on a submarine unrealistic.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Sorry. Ilona Andrews had one. I remember when I was reading through a lot of urban fantasy, and I saw the review for this book. It was just a criticism of the choreography of the fights. Obviously, this person was super into fencing. It was a male name, so I'm assuming it's a male reader who somehow wound up in a paranormal romance, thinking he was getting a Dresden Files type urban fantasy. It's like, the story's not about the fight scene, dude. The story is about something else. We're sorry that it is not meeting your expectations. However, the author's not going to change.
Yeah.
This is the I adore the Jane Yellow Rock series by Faye Hunter, and some of it is absurd. Some of the fight scenes are so ridiculous and over the top. And for me, every time the vampires move faster than sound, I'm like, but I don't care. I put it aside because I love Faith's style. I love her Soulwood series. I love Nell. I wish she would have stopped writing about Jane and just write about Nell all the time. But there's not enough for me to read, so I got to go read something else. The Walker Papers is one of my other favorite series. I think that's fantastic, and it's ridiculous and over the top at the cosmic power level that the Walker's at now. Of course, she's a shaman. If somebody came into this expecting realism, you're in the wrong place. I'm sorry. If it doesn't work for you, great, put it down. You don't have to finish a book. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of us who grew up having to finish books in school, we're obligated. We feel like we have to. If I start a book, I have to finish it. And now that I'm old, I don't feel that way anymore. I'll DNF a book really fast. In the first chapter or two, no. If the epilogue is 20 pages of people who aren't even the protagonist and it has nothing to do with the story, the author doesn't value my time enough to get going. Nope, sorry. And I think that's part of the challenge that I struggled with when I wrote my first book. That's not my first book. My Phil Athens, my editor, deleted the first 900 words and said, your story starts here. I'm like, but how will they know all the things? And the reader doesn't need to know all the things. And that's for writers, we have to write that stuff, but we also have to learn how to delete those words. And we have to learn how to meet the reader's expectations and get the story going. Because a contemporary reader is very different. When East of Eden was a big deal, readers had a slower expectation. It was a generation who was accustomed to, I'm going to read a chapter and then I'm going to go to sleep. And I need to finish this book because everybody else is reading it. I won't know what they're talking about if I also haven't read this book. We're in a niche world now where my daughter is reading Korean crime drama from the 50s. She and about 50 other people on the planet are the only one reading those stories right now. And that's okay. Because we don't have a global monolithic culture anymore. So I'm just looking for the 50 people that like really dark epic fantasy, want an anti-heroine, and don't mind some sex and graphic violence on the page. There are a lot of people who don't, and that's okay. I'm not writing for them.
That's it. That is it. So, yes, well, we've covered quite a bit of ground and some really great insights. So one last question, and where can we find this first book? Not really your first book, but first book to the readers.
The best place is
the newsletter. I mean, where can we find you? Have a website, or where? How can
so Dave Reed Central is just Dave Reed REED.me. That's my website. You can find all of the things linked there. The pre-order's up on Amazon right now. I'm trying to teach the algorithm who likes this book so they'll know who to show it to. I will be wide. My intention is to be on Apple Books and Google Play and everywhere else that ebooks are, and in every bookstore that is willing to order from Ingram. But in the grand scheme of things, Dave, D-A-V-E, Reed, R-E-E-D.me is where you can find the newsletter. You can find the Kickstarter, which is launching in about a week and a half, and all of the other things. The pre-orders right there on the front page. And I occasionally blog about random things. I like to recommend other authors' books and tell people what I enjoy reading, what I think is fascinating, and everything's very much focused on my niche. So if you're looking for Pollyanna, you will not find it on my website.
Good to know. You've all been forewarned.
Yes, I do. I have trigger warnings that I put on the book, because I don't want people who are going to be damaged by something I've written to wander into it by accident and go, oh my God, he put a kitten in a box. full disclosure, I do not put kittens in boxes. That's not a thing that happens in my book. But just as a random example, I want to make sure that the people who are picking it up are finding what they're looking for and not be surprised or ambushed by something. And I don't know that enough authors are doing that. And I think fan fiction has made it normal for a lot of readers. And I think that more and more authors should. So if you're writing a book and your blurb doesn't let me know what's coming, maybe you should. I've read some dark fantasy, and I got to a place where I was like, oh, I really wish she would have told me that was going to happen at some point in the blurb. Because yeah, I have a fairly high squick factor, but there are things. Diana Gabaldon's one of those. There are some things in Outlander that made me go, and it's not even the physical stuff. It's just the social stuff, the interpersonal stuff. I'm like, no, Claire, I'm not sure that I can understand why you're forgiving Jamie for the spanking. It just, maybe I'm just too modern a man, but I got a problem with that.
Well, you hear that? Y'all been warned. So
thank you so much for having me on, Victoria. You're fun to talk to, and have me back anytime.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe I'll do a panel on dark authors. There's a lot of stuff in the works that I'm still working out the details, but it's been fun and a pleasure to talk with you.
My challenge to the people who are watching, because a lot of you will be authors, is leap into your story. Get started, continue writing, don't quit. All you have to do to win, whatever you define as win, is not quit.
Good.
But it will take longer than you hope. I'm sorry.
Yes.
It just always does.
Yes. But that's okay, because I'm working on a teaching series, the Leap Into Your Story series of online courses that are going to be due out in the fall. That's going to break down some of that process to make it easier.
Nice. That's fantastic.
And it's a unique blend. It's kind of life coach, writing coach, because those two go hand in hand. So
I have a team of writing coaches. I think the reason I've got as far as I am is Becca Simon and her team have helped me figure out how my brain is wired. I probably could have been diagnosed with autism when I was a kid, but back in the Stone Ages, nobody knew what to look for and what to diagnose. And so just figuring out my own neurology and my own writing process. And I love the fact that you're putting together a course specifically to help people work through. And for a lot of us, the blank page is terrifying.
Yes, exactly.
And there's a lot of mythology out in the world, and there's different people. It works different ways. I love Nora Roberts, but she says you can't edit a blank page. The way that my brain is wired, I absolutely do. I edit a whole bunch before I ever put fingers to keyboard. And so people hear that and they feel like they have to dump all this random stream of consciousness just so they have something to edit. But if that isn't how your brain works, if that's not how you're wired, that's not helpful. And love him or hate him, Stephen King says you're not a real writer if you don't write 2,000 words a day. Well, okay, I'm not a real writer. Sorry, Steve. I'm Mr. Right. I'm not a writer.
There's very few people I know who can do 2,000 words a day. I think it's maybe 800. He's an exception.
Well, everybody's different, and he is. I think, and I think he sped up a little bit since he isn't doing 8 balls and he's not on a cocaine bender every weekend. He's writing more just to stay sane, which is one of the reasons I write. I need to pour it out of my head. I write morning pages just to dump that out. It's really necessary. But there's just learning how you work and what gets you going and your why. We talked about that. You asked me why I'm writing this. That's one of the most important things. Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, is foundational. You have to figure that out. And sometimes you got to write a lot of words. Like Chuck told me, you're going to write 1 million words of bleep before you figure out how to write a good story.
Yeah.
Damn it, Chuck.
Yes. Well, that's really good confirmation, because part of my course does have that in there. There's all that.
Sometimes you just need somebody to hold your hand. And for people who live in places where there aren't big writing groups, or there's not like the Yukon writers or the San Antonio romance authors, you need somebody to walk with you. And I think Victoria, you'd be a fantastic guide and mentor along that artist's journey. So awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dave. Again, it's just been an amazing time with you, and thank you for
Thanks.
sharing those fantastic insights. I know there's going to be some new writer, who knows, even a season one that needed a refresher with some new perspective as well. So do want to thank you for tuning into the Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, work through the process, and meet others who've done it so you can be guided into your journey to writing your own story. So remember to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. And again, while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media network. We are looking forward to seeing you next time on the Leap Into Your Story podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, break down the process, and meet others who've done it so you can leap into your own story. Remember to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're there, subscribe and like to us via your favorite social media network. We're looking forward to seeing you next time on the Leap Into Your Story podcast.